So several decades before Jesus even appears on the scene, Romans are pretty familiar with the idea that somebody can die and become a god, or be the son of a god and the saviour of mankind. So who exactly was Jesus? Well, it kind of depends on who you ask.
Some scholars believe he was an apocalyptic preacher or a political troublemaker. Others think he was more of a wise sage or a hippie pacifist who preached love and brotherhood. It's a little bit strange that after 2,000 years, scholars still can't agree on exactly who Jesus was. One thing they all do agree on, though, Jesus was a Jew. Look at pictures of Jesus in most churches today. You'll see a white guy with long brown hair, neatly trimmed beard, blue eyes. But Christianity started out as a Jewish personality cult. Jesus was a Jew, so he probably would have looked more like, I don't know, DJ Khaled than Jared Leto. He would have been a dark-skinned, brown-eyed Palestinian. Let's put it this way. If Jesus returned and tried to board a plane in the United States today, he'd probably get taken into a little room and randomly screened. And when I say Jesus was a Jew, I don't just mean ethnically a Jew, I mean a religious Jew. In fact, he was a very religious Jew, and so were most of the early members of his sect.
Jesus is Torah observant, Peter is Torah observant, James is Torah observant, and Paul is Torah observant.
The Torah is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament.
Jesus and the guys who ran his group after he died, Peter, the guy he left in charge, and James, who, according to tradition, was one of Jesus' brothers, were Jews, not Christians. And they weren't trying to start a new religion.
They weren't trying to reject Judaism, they were just trying to fix it.
Jesus was not only Torah observant, he actually made the law stricter rather than looser. The law says don't commit adultery, Jesus says don't think about it, that's harder. The law says don't murder, Jesus says don't be angry.
And being a religious Jew in the first century must have been pretty depressing. For hundreds of years, Jewish prophets had promised that their God, Yahweh, really thought they were pretty special. They were his favourite tribe. He had their back, and he was going to make sure they ruled the world. But for some reason, Yahweh hadn't delivered. Century after century, the Jews had been invaded and conquered. In fact, just a few years after Jesus was born, his homeland had finally become an official Roman province. Instead of coming to the conclusion that their prophets were wrong, or that Yahweh had lied to them, the Jews just decided they must have disappointed him and he was ignoring them or not answering their prayers. So anyway, the Jews decided they had to be better and make Yahweh happy with them again. But how? It's like there are hundreds of different versions of Christianity today, and they all think that they're the right one. We know that in the first century there were lots of different versions of Judaism as well, and they were all trying to figure out the magic trick to get them back into Yahweh's good book. Now, some Jews living in the first century believed that God was going to send someone to save them. They called that person the Messiah.
So how do you know who's a Messiah? Different people will give you different answers, and there are different messianic candidates to follow.
I'm just looking for the official guide to knowing who the chosen one is. I'm sure it's got to be in here somewhere.
There's no messianic checklist in Judaism, as if make sure your mother is a virgin when you're conceived, walk on water, raise the dead, die a sacrificial death, come back after 3 days and ascend. Some Jews were expecting a shepherd, others were expecting the angel Michael, still others were expecting a priest, and still others a warrior. Some people thought John the Baptist was the Messiah, and he doesn't fit any of those categories.
We use the term Messiah, and the term Messiah is fine. It means anointed. It means that God has anointed this person with oil. But when you're talking about Messiah, you're really talking about somebody who is a king in the line of the greatest of all the Jewish kings, King David. And lots of Jews believed that a King David-like figure would establish himself in Jerusalem, and he would transform Israel.
Some Jews thought the Messiah was going to be a great warrior to lead them to a military victory. Others thought he might be a charismatic preacher who would convince the entire world to believe in Yahweh. Others, they didn't think about the Messiah much at all.
All Jews wanted a Messiah, because normally if someone's going around calling themselves a Messiah, it's going to lead to war. War means death, famine, bloodshed, that type of thing. So, I mean, not everyone wanted a Messiah. Not everyone even believed in one.
So why is this important? Well, when Jesus is dragged before the Roman governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, the charges laid against him are that he's claiming to be the Christos, the Christ, which is just the Greek word for Messiah. In other words, he's claiming to be the King of the Jews.
Mark 15:2. Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the King of the Jews?"
Claiming to be the Messiah was an act of political rebellion against Rome. A modern equivalent would be declaring you're the rightful king of the United States.
Now, an important thing to understand about the Jewish concept of the Messiah was that he wasn't supposed to be divine and he wasn't going to have magical powers. He was just going to be a regular man.
They did sometimes talk about the Messiah as the Son of God, but not in the later Christian sense. They meant Son of God in the sense of good Israelite, because all Israelites are sons of God in the adopted sense.
Anointed by God, special to God, but like their kings, David, Solomon, and their other good kings, yeah, fully human.
Somebody that God has placed on the throne to rule in his stead. But it doesn't really mean somebody who has from all time been sitting at the right hand of God the Father. It's a different concept from that. It's much more Jewish and it's much more grounded than that.
The Son of God would only have been used, I think, in a metaphorical sense, not in the way that we come to expect with Christian doctrine.
Here's an interesting thing about Jesus' name. In Hebrew, his name was Yeshua, which basically translates as God saves or Saviour. And as we've already seen, Christ means Messiah, and the Messiah was supposed to be the Saviour. So Jesus the Christ translates as Saviour the Saviour.
According to the Jewish historian Josephus, there were actually quite a few guys who people thought might be the Messiah walking around Judea roughly around about the same time as Jesus.
None of them succeeded. They all failed. They were all killed. And can you really be the Messiah if you don't achieve anything?
Which is why the vast majority of Jews in the middle of the first century don't follow Jesus.
Because a Messiah was not supposed to die on a cross executed by the Romans. Because this is somebody who's supposed to lead a successful military victory, if you just get executed as a revolutionary, in the eyes of most Jews, that rules you out.
Can't possibly be the Messiah.
Can't be the Messiah in that precise understanding. So what they reinterpret, they reinvent the meaning of the word.
It's an oxymoron, it's a paradox. And the Messiah doesn't get crucified. He rises up, defeats the Romans, and establishes a new Davidic kingdom.
What is that? So you want to be a Messiah?
Well, the Messiah, actually.
Okay. Did you kick the Romans out of Judea?
Well, no, not yet, but I tried.
Have you converted the world to Judaism?
Well, no, I'm planning on it, but, you know, it's...
Did you bring about world peace in your lifetime?
Well, not yet, no, but...
Boy, bye. You really don't have the qualifications to be the Messiah now, do you? Maybe you should try carpentry. I see you have some experience in that area. Next.